Hey, did you know that Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Debussy, and many of the great masters of music were incredibly good improvisers? It's also interesting to note that the way they learned music is not how we're making our kids learn music. It's all in my upcoming book, Why Children Quit Music, and I get to the bottom of how music education is really doing a number on our kids and making them quit. Sign up to my email list on nikhilhogan.com for updates on the book. Also, if you're a fan of the show, please consider becoming a supporter on Patreon to earn free goodies, music tutorials, and access to our private Facebook group. All right, let's get to the show. On today's episode of the Nikhil Hogan Show, I'm talking to country music legend, a member of the original Nashville A-Team, Grammy Award-winning multi-instrumentalist and virtuoso harmonica player Charlie McCoy. We talk about how he got his start in music and how he rose to the elite of Nashville's music scene, working with Roy Orbison, Simon and Garfunkel, Bob Dylan, Elvis Presley, his Grammy-winning album The Real McCoy, and much, much more. Stay tuned. You're listening to The Nikhil Hogan Show. Hey everyone, welcome back to The Nikhil Hogan Show, the show dedicated to bringing you, the listener, high-quality, in-depth music conversations with the world's best musicians. What a treat we have today. A real country music legend, Grammy Award-winning multi-instrumentalist, known for his virtuoso harmonica playing, Charlie McCoy joins us on the program for the first time. A fixture in Nashville studios for over 50 years, Charlie worked with some of the biggest names in music such as Roy Orbison, Elvis Presley, Bob Dylan, Simon and Garfunkel, Dolly Parton, Johnny Cash, Vince Gill, and many, many more. For a 15-year stretch, he did more than 400 sessions a year. A grand total would number more than 12,000 sessions. He won the Grammy in 1972 for The Real McCoy for Best Country Instrumental Performance, in addition to a total of 7 nominations. He's been awarded the Country Music Association's Instrumentalist of the Year 2 times, and over his career, he has recorded 39 solo albums. In addition, he served as the music director for 18 years for the syndicated television series Hee Haw. In 2009, it was announced that Charlie would be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, along with Roy Clark and Barbara Mandrell. Charlie, it's my honor to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Mikhail. Nice to talk to you.
Now, you were born in the town that Hank Williams died in?
That's right, Oak Hill, West Virginia. He was on his way to a concert January 1st, 1953. He had a driver taking him from Knoxville to Canton, Ohio, and it was, probably 5, 6 in the morning. The driver stopped for gas at the only gas station open, and he went back to see if Hank needed to go to the bathroom or wanted coffee or something, and he was gone.
Tell me if this is true. When you were a child, you were reading a comic book, and you came across an ad which said, you can play the harmonica in 7 days or your money back, and it costs just 50 cents and a box top.
That is correct. Of course, it was 1949, 50 cents could buy something in 1949.
Prior to that, did you have any music training?
No, I was 8 years old, and I saw this ad, and I got excited about it, and so I went and begged my mother for 50 cents, and when it came in the mail, after about a day, my mother said, could you take it outside? An 8-year-old, the harmonica is it's like insanity,
It's a deadly weapon. Well, growing up, did you listen to records? Did your mom or your dad, did they put on records for you to listen to, or did you listen to live music? Were you aware of those things happening in your early youth?
Not really. I was more interested in the summers, I was more interested in trying to play baseball. But I had the harmonica, and that year at Christmas, I got a guitar for Christmas. And I had a couple of uncles who played a few chords on the guitar, so they taught me those chords. And so I was all into the guitar. Actually, I must admit, from that age to about 16, the harmonica took a backseat. And then in the 50s, rock and roll hit the scene, and I was all over that. And my dad said he'd buy me an electric guitar if I'd promised to take lessons. And I said, of course, you know. And then I got into, and it was the time, you know, Bill Haley and the Comets, Elvis, Carl Perkins, you know, Gene Vincent, rockabilly. And then I discovered Chuck Berry, and as a guitar player, he became my, you know, my hero and my idol that I would try to play like. But then, when I was 16, I heard a record by Jimmy Reed.
You Got Me Dizzy.
Exactly. When I heard that harmonica, I thought, wait a minute, I've got one of those. I got to learn to do that.
What was it about that tune that really got you?
That haunting harmonica, the way he played it, you know, it was just, it was amazing, you know. So I got heavy into Jimmy Reed, and then that led me into all the other blues players, and especially Little Walter. So
you took guitar lessons then. Did you have a teacher?
I had a teacher. I had a teacher from Hawaii, actually. He transplanted Hawaiian, and he didn't he didn't care much for the music on the radio, you know, the rock and roll. I remember one day he told me, he said, listen, you can play all that rock and roll you want, but as long as you can play society swing, if you can play the businessman's bounce, you can always work.
Was he a jazz guy?
Yeah, he was. His main instrument was steel guitar. He was a Hawaiian steel player, but he also played electric guitar. But he was, you know, very old school and traditional, and he was trying to teach everything, you know, by the note and by the book, and I understood that. That was fine.
Now, there was also a music theory class at your high school, and you said you really enjoyed that class. Could you talk about it?
In seventh grade, when I went to junior high, I signed up for chorus, and I loved chorus. And I had, and actually we had, the teacher decided she was going to teach some of us how to direct. So 3 of us became student directors of the 7th grade chorus. And then as it went on through high school, I liked that, and I stayed with it, and I stayed in chorus. I was very interested in chorus. And when I got to high school, I was the only student director. And so I was already kind of used to being in front of everyone and leading everyone. And I made a decision when I was in the 11th grade that, yes, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to major in music. And so my teacher, my chorus teacher, who I'd had there for 4 years already, said, you're going to need a major instrument for this, you know. And guitar and harmonica won't do it for college. So her and the new orchestra teacher in our school put their heads together and they said, bass, you need to learn bass. So they let me take a bass home from the school that summer. And, you know, it was like, you know, playing with a bow. It was an acoustic bass, playing with a bow. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I would go to the piano, find a note, and mark frets on the bass, you know, with a pencil. So at the end of that junior year, there was a note on the bulletin board that said, next year we're going to offer music theory. Anyone who knows where middle C is goes in advanced. Well, 15 of us signed up for advanced music theory. Most of them were kids out of the band, out of the marching band, you know, and a couple out of the chorus, and a couple out of the orchestra. And it was the orchestra teacher who was the teacher, and I found out later that it was an experiment the state of Florida did. They wanted to try music theory in high school, and they picked the school who had the right teacher, and I was very lucky to be at that school. And I learned so much from that lady. When I went to the university and we did a placement test, you know, all the freshmen who came in had to do a placement test to see where they would go in music theory. I skipped 4 semesters of music theory because of what I learned in high school.
Now, at the same time, you were also playing in a local country music dance called the Old Southern Jamboree.
Yeah, I was, I was in a rock band. We had a rock band, but the bass player in the band, he had played some country music, and he knew these people, and he asked me he said, "Come on, I want to take you someplace. I want to take you to hear some music." So my dad, I talked about it. He said, "Yeah, go ahead." So we went to this big country music dance, and I didn't have a clue about country music, I'll be honest with you. And we were in there, and while we were sitting there standing watching, he left as if to go to the restroom, and the next thing I know, the guy in charge says, "We've got a special guest in the audience, and we want to see if we can get him up here to play and sing for you." And he introduced me, and and my friend set me up, right? He set me up, and he came back, and they took a break, and the guy come back to me. "Well, I guess you're going to have to go up there and sing." I said, "What are you doing? I don't even know if these guys know songs I know." He said, "Well, go up and talk to them." So I went up, and I thought, what am I going to do in this place? And so I asked the leader of the band, I said, "You guys know Johnny B. Good?" He said, "Yeah, what key?" And I said, "Well, A." I said, "I'm going to have to borrow a guitar." He said, "No problem." So I played Johnny B. Good with this country band, and they played it great. The audience loved it, and they hired me then to come every Saturday and do 10 minutes each hour of rock and roll.
Now, is it true that while you were doing this, the faculty at Miami University actually warned you not to play rock and roll music?
Yeah, I was called in by the dean of music, and he said, I hear that you play rock and roll, even country music, And I said, yeah. I said, this the college expenses is a heavy load here, and my father's just a blue-collar worker, and I make extra money for gas, to come to school and all that. And the guy says, well, we at the university feel that these lower forms of music will hinder your learning of classical music. And I said, well, I appreciate what you're saying, but I have to do it because I need the money. And anyway, later, one of my teachers heard about it, and she called me. She asked me to stay after class. She said, I heard you talk to the dean today. And I said, yeah, he was trying to get me to give up on my rock and roll and country music, which I do, for gas money to school and all that. And she said, rock and roll, huh? And I said, yes. And she said, are you any good at it? And I said, well, I don't know. Some people think I am. She said, well, if you're not, practice more. And that was great. This is a woman whose claim to fame was at Eastman School of Music, she flunked Leonard Bernstein because she said, this was a 70-year-old woman from France. And she says, I recognized he was a genius, but he was goofing off, and someone needed to get his attention.
I'm loving this interview already. I mean, okay, I have the next thing now. So you were working at the country music dance, the Jamboree. Mel Tillis walks in, and you catch his eye.
Mel Tillis came in, right.
And he said, son, you come to Nashville, and I'll get you on records tomorrow.
That's what he said, and that was like showing a steak to a wolf, because I was all over that. I didn't know anything. I didn't know that much about Nashville, but when you're, when you're 18, you know everything, but you don't know anything. And so the day after high school, the band leader there at the Old South Jamboree drove me to Nashville, and we went to the office. Mel Tillis, his manager, and we walked in, and I said, I introduced myself. I said, Mel Tillis told me to come here and see him, and she said, Mel's out of town. But she said, what'd you say your name was again? And I told her, and she said, oh, I think she told his manager about you. Just a minute, let me get him. So she went in and brought the boss man out. His name was Jim Denny. He is also a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame. And he said, yeah, Mel told me about you. You want to get some auditions? I said, yeah.
Wait, hold on a second. Charlie, backtrack a little bit. What were you doing that caught Mel's eye at the night?
Playing guitar and singing Chuck Berry.
He saw that and he loved it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's carry on. So you saw Jim Denny.
So he set me up with, and this was amazing because this man had never heard me. He didn't know anything about me. But he set up auditions with Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley. And I didn't know who these two guys were, I didn't know how important they were. And so I go into Chet Atkins' office and sing and play Johnny Be Good. And he said, well, son, I think you're pretty good, but, we just don't do this kind of music here. And then I got the same quote from Owen Bradley. And, so all of a sudden you're thinking, I don't know, this little country town, when you're 18, you know everything. But then Owen Bradley said to me, hey, I'm having a session this afternoon. Would you like to come watch? And, I said, yeah, of course. I watched 13-year-old Brenda Lee record one of her first hit records. Watching those musicians work, my whole idea changed. I thought, you know what? To heck with singing. I want to do this someday.
And you saw the Jordanaires. And then another thing that I found really interesting is that you were in the studio with the music arranger Neil Matthews, and you saw the precursor to the Nashville number system, which is kind of a distilled version of classical harmony, but it doesn't use music notation. It uses regular numbers. Right.
Yeah. After that Brenda Lee session, so I went back to the hotel, and over dinner I was talking with my guy from Miami that drove me. His name, by the way, was Happy Harold. We were talking, and I was just, I couldn't say enough about that session. I was like, I don't know, I probably didn't sleep much that night either. Well, anyway, that night I get a call at the hotel, and it's Jim Denny. He said, there's another session tomorrow morning. You want to go see it? And I'm thinking, like, try and keep me away. So I went back to the same studio. Now, this was not Owen Bradley's production. This was Columbia Records. The artist was a guy called Carl Butler. But on that session were the Jordanaires. And he went with me over to the studio, to introduce me to the producer and all that. And I said, see, I had no idea that Jordanaires worked every day in Nashville singing on records. I thought they just worked for Elvis. And I said, aren't those the Jordanaires? He said, yeah, you want to meet them? I said, sure. So went over, and Neil was standing over there by the music stand, and he introduced me to Neil Matthews, and we're talking, well, where are you from, son, and all that. And corner of my eye, I see this yellow pad on the music stand with these numbers on it, and I said, excuse me, you mind if I look at this a second? And I started looking at that, and he said, you know what that is? And I said, I think I do. And he said, well, you're the only one around here who does. And it was brilliant because I could tell what he was doing, because I had, like I said, I'd had that heavyweight classical harmony in high school, and I could equate it to what he was doing, and I thought, man, this makes so much more sense.
So he was the one who started it?
Yes, he's the one, Neil Matthews.
Wow, that's a real important historical note.
And he also went to music school, and he learned classical harmony, but he figured out a shortcut because, he was doing arrangements for a quartet, and those guys, they had sung together so long, you write a chord down and each guy knew which note to go to, So that stuck in my head big time too. Then I go back and go to university for 1 year.
What led you to that first recording session with Anne Margaret?
Well, I I dropped out of college, broke my father's heart. He finally forgave me when I introduced him to Dolly Parton some years later. But I was promised a guitar job. Got to Nashville, and this guy, of course, back then nobody had cell phones, and people rarely ever called long distance. But this guy was in Nashville, and he had heard that this young artist, was putting a band together to go to Canada, and he needed a guitar player. So he talked to him, and then he never got back to him. And I guess he just assumed the job was still available when he called me. Well, that's all I needed, because I was about ready. I was about done with music school, and I was so anxious to go to Nashville. So he and I drove to Nashville. There was no interstates back then. It was a long drive. We drove to Nashville and went to the first rehearsal, and we walked in, and the artist said, "Well, I never heard back from you. I've already hired a guitar player." Well, you can imagine how I felt. And this guy was so nice. He said, "Well, listen, what else can you play?" And I said, I play harmonica. He said, "No, I don't need a harmonica. Hey, can you play drums?" And at that moment, I thought, say no and you're done. I said, "Yes, but I don't have any." And he said, "We'll get you some." Because I knew a little bit about it. It wasn't a total something I'd never tried before.
Actually, let me jump in with a question here, Charlie. So, you're a multi-instrumentalist. By that point in your life, were you pretty competent on a bunch of instruments already?
No, just guitar, harmonica, and a little piano. That was it so far. So we went to Canada for 2 weeks and played in a hotel in Toronto, and came back to Nashville. And the band wasn't very good. The audience didn't like us much. The artist was from Georgia, and he did a lot of real low Southern humor. And the Canadians just didn't get into it, and so we didn't go over very well. But he said, "But hey, we're going to work in Georgia next," he said. And I thought, okay, this will be better. And we went and we played a show in Georgia. And then, I don't know, a couple of weeks passed, and he calls me and said, "Well, I don't have any more bookings. I guess I'm going to break the band up." So I was living with a songwriter, the guy that was going to get me the guitar job. By the way, he's a Hall of Fame songwriter. His name is Kent Westbury.
Right.
I guess the biggest song he ever wrote was Love on a Hot Afternoon by Gene Watson. Also, the Anne Margaret song, which we're going to talk about, the Beatles recorded that, and he's had a lot of cuts. Anyway, so we're living together, and everyday songwriters would come over, and they would write. And I was just fascinated by this, and I'd sit around and listen and watch. And then one day, they were working on this song, and he said, "Hey, why don't you get your harmonica and play along with us?" So I got my harmonica out, and it was the song called "I Just Don't Understand." And he said, "Listen, when I do this demo, I'm going to ask Mr. Denny if you can play on the demo." I said, "Great, a session." It was only a demo, but it was a session. And that's the way many, many musicians in Nashville got their start, was by playing on demos. So we go to the studio, do the demo, and it was very cool. I really enjoyed it. And the session leader there was Harold Bradley, and he's a Hall of Fame musician, and he and I became great friends. In fact, he was the one who inducted me in the Hall of Fame. But anyway, so about a month passes.
Well, how was that session? Were you really nervous playing the harmonica for the first time in the studio?
Well, not that much, because I knew what to play already, and it was only a demo session. I was a little nervous about meeting those other musicians, but I had seen them. I had seen most of these guys on that first Brenda Lee session.
I guess I want to jump to Candyman then. So that you've mentioned that launched your career as a session player.
Well, I get a call from Jim Denny, and he said, "Hey, that song that you played on with Kent?" He said, "Chet Atkins is going to record that song with an unknown singer from Sweden named Anne Margaret, and he wants you to play on the record. Play exactly what you played on the demo." And I'm thinking, yes, this is it.
Did Chet Atkins know that you were the same kid who auditioned 2 years ago?
No, but when I walked in and Jim Denny went with me and he said, Chet, here's the guy that played the harmonica. Chet said, I know you. He said, I've seen you before. And I said, yes, sir, I auditioned for you a couple of years ago. Yeah, you played a Black Gibson, right? You sang Johnny Be Good. I was amazed that he remembered that. So we did the Ann Margaret session, and at the end of that session, the bass player, Bob Moore, walked over to me and said, are you free Friday? Hey, I was free the rest of my life, you know. And I said, yeah. And he said, come back here. I'm recording Roy Orbison. Whoa. I was a huge fan of Roy Orbison. And we did Candyman. And when that record hit the radio, my phone started ringing. It's like my whole career is like a fairy tale, you know. Things just fall into place.
Okay, everybody knows Pretty Woman. And you were playing that riff on not even the harmonica, the saxophone.
Well, I was playing part of the riff. Boots Randolph was doing the hard part. Because when they were working on the song, producer said to me, listen, I don't hear any harmonica on this. What else can you do? And Boots Randolph was on the session. He said, hey, I got my baritone sax over here. Why don't you just play a couple of notes on it? Because I had worked on the sax some. I knew a little bit about it. I could do it. So I said, okay. So I played Boots did the hard part. All I did was bump, bump, and he went do, 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 bump, bump. Anyway, so that's all I did, but it was on Pretty Woman, and that was very cool.
All right, let's jump to Simon and Garfunkel. Now, you played on the Boxer, and you played the bass harmonica, and you've mentioned that Simon was very definitely in charge. Every single note you hear on the record was dictated to me by him. Can you tell me about that recording session?
Well, this producer, Bob Johnston, who is the guy who was responsible for bringing Dylan to Nashville, also brought Simon and Garfunkel. And I realized right off the bat that Simon was the musical, he was in charge of the music. I heard several suggestions by Garfunkel, and Simon's reply was always, no, Artie, that won't work. And so they had asked me before the session if I owned a bass harmonica, you know. And I did own one. I didn't play much, but I owned it. And so they said, want you to bring it for this. And he did dictate every note to me. And you know what? He was right.
You mentioned Dylan and Bob Johnston. Now, this is really interesting. I guess it could be said that you are kind of the main reason Bob Dylan decided to come to Nashville and record all those albums, because Bob Johnston got you to come to New York on the pretense of Broadway tickets and lured you into a session to play guitar, and before you knew it, you're on Desolation Row. Yeah,
Bob Johnston was a songwriter from Texas, and I met him. He called me just out of the blue, and he said, listen, I'm a writer. I write for the Elvis Presley Music Group, and I'm trying real hard to get my songs in Elvis movies, and I need some great demos. Can you get a band together and make me some good, you know, not just country, but kind of, you know, in the middle rock? And I said, yeah, sure, you know. But by this time, you know, it's like, it's about 63, 64, you know, and I'm pretty well established, and I got, you know, a lot of young friends who are great players that are coming on their way up. And so I said, yeah. So we would make demos for Elvis movies. And by the way, Bob Johnston, he ended up getting about 7 of his songs in Elvis movies. And but the songs that he didn't get in Elvis movies, he would pitch around to other record labels. And so he was in New York and Columbia Records, and he's playing a song for this head of A&R, and the guy said, God, these demos are great. Where'd you make these? And he said, Nashville. And he said, did you produce these? You know, producer is the most overused word in the record business sometimes. But he said, oh, yeah. He said, you think you'd ever want to be a record producer? He was like me, you know, say yes and figure it out. He said, yes. He said, well, we've got an artist who's on the end of her contract, and if we don't get something good on her, we're dropping her. And he said, okay, what's her name? He said, Patty Page. So he said, will you do a session on Patti Page? So he was a smart guy. He, through his contacts with the Elvis Presley Music Group in California, he found out about a movie that had a theme that needed recorded. And he went to the movie people and he said, how about if Patti Page records a song? What? Patti Page? That would be great. So he sets up a session. He calls me and said, get the guys together. We're recording Patti Page. So we did the song called Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte. It was a huge hit and saved her contract for Columbia, you know. And so now Columbia, they found their knight in shining armor. And they said, how'd you like a shot with Bob Dylan? And, of course, he said yes. And it was Highway 61 Revisited. So he moved to New York, and he said, if you're ever in New York, I can get you Broadway tickets. Okay, so decided to go to New York and called him. Hey, I'm coming to New York. How about my Broadway tickets? He said, no problem. By the way, I want you to come over to Columbia Studio like tomorrow and meet Bob Dylan. Okay. So I went over, and Dylan said, I'm getting ready to sing a song. Why don't you get that guitar over there and play along? There was an extra guitar. And it was Desolation Row.
Wait, how did he tell you the chords? Did he have a piece of paper, or did he just tell you like the key and tell you to follow along?
Well, yeah, he just played it once. He played a bit of it, and the doggone thing was 11 minutes long.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was just him and me and a bass player. And we had time. The bass player had another session to go to, so we had time to do one take, listen to it back, and do one more take. Session's over. Bass player leaves.
What did you think at the time? What was going through your mind when you were recording that?
What would Grady Martin do? I was overwhelmed by that. You know, I mean, okay, I play a little guitar, but mainly rhythm, and I was thinking about, you know, Grady Martin, Hall of Fame player who played on El Paso, and I'm thinking, boy, this would be right up his alley, you know. So I was really, in my mind, I was really struggling, you know, because it was. I was kind of overmatched, I thought. But anyway, little time passed. Bob Johnson calls me and said, Dylan's coming to Nashville.
It's so funny you said that you said you're overwhelmed, because apparently Bob Dylan loved what you did, and that's what happened. He came to Nashville. Yeah, he came to Nashville.
Yeah.
So now I love the stories you were telling about the recording sessions for Blonde on Blonde, which seemed completely unstructured and spontaneous, unlike the typical sessions that you're used to, which is very, you know, by the minute, very structured. Can you talk about like the vibe of that recording session?
Well, the first day started like, you know, it was his flight was late. We were booked at 2 p.m. And after finally, you know, we're all set up. We tuned up. They got mic checks and all that. And then Bob Johnson said, I just got a call. Dylan's flight is late. He won't be here till 6 o'clock. So you guys take a break. So we're just hanging out, you know, and we go to eat and come back. Finally, he comes in, and then Bob Johnson comes out and said, he hadn't finished writing the first song yet. You guys take a break. And at 4 a.m. the next morning, we started with Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, a 14-minute ballad. And, you know, everybody's sitting there saying, please don't let me mess up, you know.
Could you guys do edits back in the day? Could you cut in and punch in?
Yeah, but, you know, they weren't really into that. Dylan wasn't really into that.
Okay.
It was pretty much what you hear is what you get, which is what we were used to. Because, you know, until that technology came along, every time you went to play on a record, I mean, what you did was the record, you know. And that's how I learned from the old Nashville A-Team. Those guys were expected to do 3 and 4 songs every 3 hours, songs they'd never heard, and that was the record. I mean, those guys were brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
You played bass guitar for the John Wesley Harding album, which was a big hit as well. What was that recording session like?
Well, it was quite different. Blonde on Blonde, I got a notion that Dylan was a little, you know, it was new to him. All the musicians were new. But then when we when he came back, and it took a long time to record Blonde on Blonde. We were, we all weren't used to that because, like I said, we did a 3-hour session, and
that was it,
and that's done. That's it. And so I think it took like 13 sessions or something to do Blonde on Blonde. And for us, that was like unheard of. We would normally do an album in 3 or 4 sessions, because, well, country music, those artists, they didn't sell a lot of units, so everybody was cost conscious, and they had a tight budget. But then when Dylan came back for John Wesley Harding, it was just me and him and Kenny Buttrey, and I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 extra guys, and we did the whole album in 9.5 hours. It was like, what a difference the way it was done, and I think he was more comfortable because he'd worked with all of us, and
one of the big tracks is All Along the Watchtower. What did you think of the Jimi Hendrix version?
Oh, I liked it a lot, and Dylan was a lot of his songs. The lyrically they're really good. A lot of them are kind of weird, but I think as a writer, he definitely wrote some amazing things. Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, and Blowing in the Wind is an amazing song.
What did Bob Dylan think of your harmonica playing? Because Bob Dylan's really well known for playing the harmonica. What did he think of your playing?
I have no idea. I never heard any comment about it.
You guys never chatted much?
No, he didn't chat with anybody.
Right. Yeah, that's what I read as well. Okay, so on to Elvis. Now that was quite an experience too. And what was it like recording with the King?
It was great. The reason I was hired is that the movie company changed the recording dates for the soundtrack, and the band that Elvis always used were booked on other sessions. And in Nashville, it's kind of an unwritten law. You don't cancel out on one artist to go work with another. You just don't do it. So Scotty Moore told the movie people, he said, hey, there's a lot of great musicians here. Why don't I just hire another band? They said, okay. So he hired me and Grady Martin and Pig Robbins and Kenny Buttrey, and, we did the soundtrack for the movie, Harem Scarum. Of course, none of us had any idea what to expect. But, this is the biggest artist in the world now that we're going to work with. He was great. He came through the door, immediately walked to every musician, shook their hand, and said, thank you for helping me. That's
great. That's really nice.
From that moment on, it was very cool.
That's really nice.
And the Jordanaires were there, and of course, that was cool because we worked with them all the time, and of course, them and Elvis had worked together, and so it was really neat. And so I ended up doing 6 more movies and 5 other albums with him.
Did you have some personal conversations with Elvis and get to chat with him about music or anything?
Not much. No. It was he was pretty businesslike, other than he'd like to sometimes sit around at the piano and play gospel music. Would drive the movie producers crazy because they're worried about their budget.
Exactly.
And I'm thinking, these people don't know. Don't worry about it. He'll get it done. He always does.
Let's talk about the Nashville A-Team, which is a really famous group of session musicians that really backed dozens of famous singers. And it was a group of people. Who were you close to? And you knew all of them? And who were your best friends in the A-Team?
Well, I knew them all very, very well. The A-Team was assembled by Owen Bradley, really, to start with. So you had the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville for all these years, and there was no place for those people to make their records. And so Harold Bradley and his brother Owen decided, this is crazy. People need to record here where these musicians are, So they built a studio. And, of course, Owen was a great piano player. Harold has been called the most recorded guitar player in history, which is very possibly true. And they assembled this group of players that was incredible, Floyd Kramer, Bob Moore on bass, Buddy Harman on drums, Grady Martin, Ray Edenton, acoustic guitar. He's the guy that did all that great work on Everly Brothers, Bye Bye Love, Wake Up Little Susie. Hank Garland.
Oh, Hank Garland is an amazing guitarist.
Yes, and he had this terrible auto accident that ended his career.
Let me ask you something, Charlie. Hank Garland was playing a lot of jazz. He released a jazz album, I believe, at one point. Among the musicians, when you guys were not working, what did you guys do to kind of blow off steam musically, or did you play different styles?
I played in a rock band. Yeah, we played on the weekends, We'd play up at Fort Campbell and Vanderbilt fraternities, high school proms, that kind of thing. I did that for 7 years. A lot of them didn't do anything extra. Well, some of them, several played the Opry, and that was a Saturday night thing. And then, like Hank had a little jazz gig down in Printer's Alley. He played down there, and so some of them had ways to, but those guys were so busy.
You said that one of your favorite recordings of yourself was a recording on George Jones's He Stopped Loving Her Today, and you called it one of the best sessions you've ever played on. Let's talk about that, He Stopped Loving Her Today.
Yeah, it was, Billy Sherrill was the producer, and so Pig Robbins was playing piano on the record. They didn't have a demo to listen to, so Billy sat at the piano and played the song while George sang it for us. And, of course, all you had to do was play it once, and Pig Robbins had it. He's a blind piano player, but one of the best session players I've ever known. Anyway, so Billy's sitting there playing this song. George Jones is singing it, and every musician in the place is looking around like, oh, my gosh, this is something special. Every once in a while you hear one of those songs you're going to work on, and you think, it's going to be something really like Pretty Woman, We all knew. We just knew. So they finished running the song down, and Billy said, you got it, Pig? And Pig said, yeah, I got it. He said, okay, I'm going to go in the control room. I want to hear you guys do it on mic. Well, I think he forgot that he'd hired me on a session, because he started back toward the control room, and all of a sudden he saw me and stopped, and he said, get something on the second verse. That was it. Many people have said that's one of the greatest country recordings ever.
That's right, of all time. And that was in 1980? So you had been really experienced at that point, right? You've done so much work, and so that was really a mature performance by you.
Well, thanks. Let me two things. Early on in my career, we're on a session at Owen's studio, and man, I'm a young guy. I'm working with the A team. I'm playing with big stars. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. We did a take on this song, and Grady Martin said, they said, okay, let's take a break and listen to it once. And Grady said, hey, come outside a minute. So I go outside, and Grady says, you know something? You got what it takes to stay around here for a long, long time. But I'm telling you, you're playing too damn much. Boy, was that a wake-up call. He said, if you can't hear every single word and understand it, you're playing too much. And
was he angry? Was he angry at you?
No, he was giving me great criticism, great advice. So we walked back in, and I'm kind of like in a little state of shock. And we started doing this song again, and I started listening to what he was playing, and I'm thinking, I get it now. I get it. From this day on, my motto is going to be less is more.
Right.
And so after that session, now here's the kicker. After that session, Harold Bradley walked over to me and he said, hey, I saw you went outside with Grady. What'd he say? And I said, he told me I was playing too much, and he was right. And Harold said, listen, the singer and the song is the picture. We're the frame. Our job is to frame the picture, not to distract from it. And that was it. That became my watchword for the rest of my career.
Now, you have recorded 39, is that right? 39 solo albums?
Now it's 42.
42. Incredible.
Yeah.
And now let's talk about your 1972 Grammy where you won the Best Country Instrumental Performance for the Real McCoy. Now that album, talk about that album. Why did it turn heads so much?
Well, because it was the first, in it was the song, the Merle Haggard song, Today I Started Loving You Again. And this was the first country instrumental song that had made it up the charts since Last Date. And so all of a sudden on country radio, there's an instrumental being played, and it was like, and people were kind of amazed by it. And so this album contained that song. And I think it was because the whole idea was, it had, like I said, it had been like 11 years since Floyd Kramer's Last Date was it's still the biggest instrumental ever recorded in Nashville. But it had been 11 years since that record was a hit. And all of a sudden now you got an instrumental playing on the radio. And I think people were, it was just something fresh and new,
Let's talk about when you were the music director of Hee Haw for a good number of years, 18 years, and it was a syndicated television series. Now that really will have to require a different set of skills, right?
It was, it was pretty easy because the band was already in place. The band was great. They already knew what to do, But one thing that I took on that I don't think the other music directors did, I helped the audio guy a lot because a lot of the things we didn't require me to play. We had a big band. We had plenty of musicians. Didn't require me to play. So I would stay in the control room and help the audio guy because I don't know if you're aware of this, but Hee Haw was recorded direct to videotape. There was no overdubs, no remixing, no fixing, It was like the old days of recording of us making records. So, and we were all used to that. But the audio guys, it was like a big load for the audio guys because, hey, you got this song, you got a couple of takes to get it. That's it. So I was always in there giving cues. Okay, you're going to have a fiddle fill the next verse, stuff like that. And that worked out pretty good.
Since you're such an incredible session musician and multi-instrumentalist, I want to get your take. These are just fun questions. Who are your top three? Let's start with guitar. Who's your top three guitarists in your opinion?
Top three guitarists? Well, are you talking about studio musicians or just...
Just anything. Yeah, all time, what you like.
Well, I think the best studio guitar player I ever heard was probably Grady Martin. We all know about El Paso, but there's so many other things that, the world doesn't know he played on that was just amazing. I'm a Jerry Reed.
Ooh.
Here's a guy that, that style of guitar, the thumb-picking style, which people give Merle Travis credit for the really bringing it to the forefront. And then Chet took it and moved it. He took it farther than Merle Travis. And then Jerry Reed came along, and he took it a lot farther than Chet. In fact, Jerry was Chet's favorite guitar player. And they were good friends, and he was a huge fan of Jerry's. And one more, it's hard to say. The one who made the impression on me early was Chuck Berry. But there's so many amazing guitar players.
Charlie, did you work with Chuck Berry?
I did one concert with him when I was 17. And I'll never forget it. I was so enamored. I don't know that I played much. I was probably stood there with my mouth hanging open all night. But I'll never forget, we went to rehearsal, and I said, Mr. Berry, what would you like for me to do? And he said, just be careful, son. And he was at the top of his game then, too, boy. I mean, it was amazing.
Top three keyboard or piano players?
Pig Robbins, session player. I mean, my gosh. Floyd Kramer is another one. And the other one, I think, would be a jazz player from Nashville named B.G. Adair.
Who's your favorite three drummers?
Kenny Buttrey. It's the guy that played on all the Dylan stuff. He also played on Heart of Gold, Neil Young, Margaritaville. I mean, hit after hit. Probably Buddy Harmon, the original A-Team drummer. And then a guy that I've toured with, he's not a session guy over here, but a Dutch drummer named Hans Molinar. I toured with him all over Europe. He's the best live drummer I've ever played with.
Other than the George Jones tune, what is another two songs that you're really proud of in your session work?
A song by an artist called Tom T. Hall called Old Dogs, Children, and Watermelon Wine. And then, I guess it's hard to say. I was country when country wasn't cool. Barbara Mandrell, Take This Job and Shove It, Johnny Paycheck. There was a bunch of them.
I forgot to ask you this, Charlie, before at the beginning when I was asking about your childhood, but do you have perfect pitch?
Do I have perfect pitch?
Yeah.
No.
You have good relative pitch, right?
I have relative pitch. And a lot of that was, I learned a lot in school. One of that French teacher that flunked Leonard Bernstein, that was what her class was about. Sight reading and ear training. And I learned a lot about that. And yeah, if I hear a note, and I don't always know what that note is, but once I know what it is, you can tell me any other note and I can find it for you. That's relative pitch.
Charlie, you've recorded an incredible amount of music for like 42 albums. For people new to you and interested in your work, can you recommend some albums or recordings for them to check out?
Well, we have a lot of different styles, that's for sure. I've done 2 albums of Celtic music, 2 albums of gospel music, 3 albums of Christmas music, and then, of course, a lot of pretty straight-ahead country. It's all there on my website, charliemccoy.com. I also have a instructional DVD, and I've even made an EP, which is in only 6 songs, of Henry Mancini music.
My last question for you is, if you were to meet a young kid who's brand new to the music scene and looking for some help, what kind of advice would you give?
Well, I would say if you really feel it, if it's just burning you up, you ought to try it, because the saddest thing would be to look back on your life and think, I didn't even try. But you got to realize the odds are pretty tough, A lot of music is, and this is especially in Nashville, it's a numbers game. There's only so many jobs there. I'm talking about when you add a studio work and touring, like being in a band with a big artist touring on the road. There's only so many jobs, and the competition for them is amazing, and especially today. And I want to tell you something this might blow your mind, or it may not, I don't know. Okay, I've done 42 albums, an EP, and instruction DVD. Counting musicians, singers, and engineers, I have used 483 people.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I still have a long list of people I want to use. I'm telling you, there's so much talent in Nashville right now. It's just mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's an amazing town.
We grew a long way from the 1A team,
Yeah, I'm really so delighted that I got the chance to talk to a country music legend, Charlie McCoy. Charlie, thanks so much for joining me on the program.
Nikhil, thank you so much. And I just want to say, my life has been blessed, and I never forget that. And I know where that blessing comes from, and I appreciate it every day.
Thank you, Charlie.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to my interview with the great Charlie McCoy. As I do more of these interviews, I just feel more and more humble when you take into account the incredible careers these people have had. It's my hope that you, the audience, really enjoyed the interview, and that's my main goal, to give the audience really insightful, deep music conversations with the world's top, most respected musicians. Please recommend the show on Facebook and also subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes. You can be a supporting listener by contributing monthly to our Patreon and receive free music tutorials, goodies, and access to our private Facebook group. Don't forget to sign up to my email list on nikhilhogan.com for updates on my book, Why Children Quit Music. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you at the next show.